Hey everybody, welcome back to the I Play 2 podcast where relatives of famous athletes, entertainers, and musicians get to tell their stories. I'm your host, Rob Adler. On the show this week is former swimmer Hilary Phelps. By the time she was a teenager, Hilary was widely recognized as the best long-distance swimmer in the country for her age group. Also, as a collegiate swimmer in the late 90s, Hilary would set several school records at the University of Richmond. Her younger brother, Michael Phelps, is the most decorated swimmer in the history of the Olympics. Hilary, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to our conversation.
First question is, how did you get involved in swimming?
So my parents were not swimmers. My mom was a high school and college cheerleader. My dad was a football player. And so they knew how to swim for fun. They were water safe. I'm the oldest of three, sister Whitney, and then brother Michael. My parents wanted us to be water safe. And so at 6 months old, my mom and dad dropped me into the water and let me swim my way to the surface. Someone was in the water, obviously, and I floated my way to the surface. And that was my first kind of introduction to the water and to the pool. And then a couple of years later, I wanted to join the summer swimming team. So I was 7 or 8 years old. There's club swimming and I wanted to try it out. I did and I liked it. I had a little bit of a natural ability. And we went to the states meet at the end, the championship meet where they gave trophies, and I got a third place trophy. And I went to my mom and I said, I want the big trophy. I want the first place trophy. And she said, well, kids that get those tend to be year-round swimmers. So if you want to try for the first place trophy, we're going to have to enroll you in year-round swimming, which meant the summer swimming is just during the summer months. It's outdoor. Year-round swimming happens year-round, and a lot of practices are inside. And so that's what we did. Our pediatrician, his kids swam. And so my parents went to him and said, hey, can you tell us about the swimming program that you're a part of? I think I'd like to get Hilary involved. And so that's how I started swimming. And I started swimming at a small club called Rassac in Bel Air, Maryland, and was the beginning of my swimming career. We grew up in a really small town, Whiteford, Maryland, in the woods. I mean, we had a really beautiful, idyllic childhood where we played in the woods and played in the stream and rode bikes and spent a lot of time outside. And my parents started driving me 30 minutes to the pool every day to swim at this club. And so they said to my sister, Whitney, come swim a 25 free. I don't want to swim a 25 free. And so they used to kind of bribe her with candy bars, with Snickers. So they would say, can you swim to one end of the pool? We'll give you the Snickers bar. That's what worked for her. And so the summer I started swimming was the year that Michael was born. So Whitney and I started summer swimming 7 and 5. And then Michael started swimming a little bit later once we got involved with another swim club called North Baltimore Aquatic Club. I was swimming year round. I was at a swim meet. It was raining and it was cool. It was 9, and I was swimming the 1500, which is the longest race in competitive swimming. So I was swimming with all these girls that were 17, and I was a 9-year-old crying, and I finished and all the girls waited for me, and I climbed out of the pool and went to my mom, and she said, do you want to swim in a different team? During that time, North Baltimore Aquatic Club, Tom Himes approached my mom and said, hey, we have a spot. It was a very selective team. It was small. It was about 100 kids at the time, and said, we have a spot for Hilary if you would like to join our club. And so my mom said, well, do you have a spot for Whitney too? And they said, absolutely. Well, we would love to have both of them. And so that's how our family was introduced to North Baltimore Aquatic Club, which is where I swam, my sister swam, and where Michael swam for his entire career. At that point, we were driving an hour to the pool. So I started swimming 2 times a day in 6th grade. I'd swim from 5 to 7 in the morning because I was a distance swimmer. So distance swimmers usually spend more time in the pool than the other swimmers because you have to get the distance in. And my dad would drive me from our house in Whiteford, Maryland, which was an hour from the pool. We'd leave the house at 3:45 every morning. He would drive me. I'd swim from 5 to 7. So my dad would then drive me from practice at 7, drop me off at the school where my mom was teaching. My parents got a boundary exception to go to a different school where my mom was a teacher, so I could swim competitively and get the miles in. And then my mom would drive me to practice that evening. So they were really committed to us doing what we loved.
With all the travel that was involved, did you end up moving closer to the club and to the school so that way you didn't have to get up at what sounded like 2:30 in the morning?
My dad, God bless him, he would get up every morning and the car would be warm. I mean, I would get up at 3:30 and I would kind of roll into it. My mom would pack breakfast for me to have on the way. It's a lot of preparation went into that. But yes, so we ultimately ended up moving to Baltimore. Parents had built this dream home and acres of land in the woods, and they sold that house and we moved to Towson. So we were closer to the pool.
With the move, did you kind of miss the freedom you had of kind of growing up in the woods and just kind of being able to go out and explore?
We play in the stream and we'd catch crayfish and do all of those really fun outdoor nature experiences when we were younger. But as I was getting older, I liked that we were a little bit closer because, we had 30 minutes to drive to the mall. And as I started getting into my teenage years, it's like, I want to go to the movies. Those things weren't available where we lived. Looking back now, that would be amazing to live there. But I liked the options and the choices that we had as we moved closer to the city to kind of do more of those social things with friends.
When you moved closer to the city, so you had to change schools to further your swimming career, was that an adjustment for you socially while you were having success in the pool? Were you able to have success at the new school and in the classroom?
So when I moved, I kind of ate by myself. I got picked on because I had short curly hair, big Sally Jesse Raphael glasses. So I didn't make friends very easily. All the comforts and connections that I'd had at my former school were gone. And in Baltimore, a lot of girls play soccer and a lot of girls play lacrosse, and swimming wasn't a huge sport, and nor was it very popular. That was kind of uncomfortable, and that was really hard. So seventh grade, I didn't have a lot of friends. And then in eighth grade, between the summer of seventh grade and eighth grade, I grew my hair long and I got contacts. And literally, I went back to school and they thought I was a new person. They're like, "Oh, is this your first day?" And I was like, "I came here last year. Nobody talked to me. Nobody wanted to be my friend last year." So it was a huge transition. And because I was the new kid and because it was a sport that wasn't very cool, it did feel a little lonely at first. But I still had the friends at swimming, which was helpful. And I was doing something that I really loved. And so that helped kind of ease that discomfort of not being popular.
As your swimming career is growing, were you enjoying kind of getting a little bit of the recognition, kind of having people become more aware of who you were as an early teenager?
In the swimming community, yes. In our school community, no. I mean, still nobody really knew swimming. I know Michael really changed that as far as having swimming be more well known and I think appreciated as a sport. Because swimming was something like, that's not hard. What do? You go for 2 hours and splash around. Have you tried to swim for 2 hours? It's really challenging. It's a great workout. At 11 and 12, I was the fastest swimmer in the country in the distance events. There was one other girl, Leanne Gathing, and she swam in North Carolina. And she was kind of my competition, but tracking my times at the time, Janet Evans was at Stanford and she was the fastest distance swimmer in the country. And she was my idol. And I looked up to her and I wanted to be her. And I remember in Swimming World, they did this big article on her, like her college experience. And I had that in my room and I had it taped to the wall. And I wanted to be the next Janet Evans. Around that time, my sister started becoming really good. She's a great swimmer and she dedicated her entire life to the sport. Where friends were really important to me and I really wanted to be accepted and liked, and I wanted to do the social things like dances, and I wanted to go to football games and soccer games and watch. Like those were things that were important to me. My sister, the most important thing to her was swimming and excelling in the sport. And so she gave up everything and she was really dedicated. And so my sister started to beat me. And I remember instead of kind of digging in and trying harder, I just said, "Oh, well." And that was when I started experimenting with drugs and alcohol really early. And my sister continued to just practice and be great. She was third in the world when she was 14 in the 200 butterfly. And that really took her in that direction. Swimming started to take a back burner for me compared to the rest of my family. And I make the joke that in the beginning, I was so enthusiastic and so excited and diehard and loved the sport. And I would have done anything for it. And then my sister came along and she was like, "Take it or leave it." But, they'd get to the end of the pool with the Snickers bar. And then Michael doesn't want to get his face in the water and is a little apprehensive, becomes the greatest swimmer of all time. I had a full scholarship to swim Division I. And I say I'm the least successful swimmer in my family, which sounds so funny, but it's like, yeah, my sister and my brother were just phenomenal swimmers.
How competitive are the three of you, both then and now?
Now that we all have kids, it's a little bit different. But yes, before we had kids, there was still competitive. There was a lot of competition, whether it was video games or anything, it would turn into competition. My mom would be like, "What did I do?" And she laughs because my sister does a Tough Mudder and is the fastest woman to finish this in her race. And I signed up for triathlon. It's an Ironman. That's kind of what we do. And so my mom's like, what did I do to you guys to make you like this competitive or driven, in the sense that, Hilary, you decide that you want to try triathlons and you do an Ironman? Like, what is this? So there is still that level of competitiveness. I think it's just a little bit more quiet than it was before. Meaning before we'd be like, okay, I'm going to beat you. Okay, let's do this. Or I'm going to race you to that. Where now it's a little less prominent.
With the Ironman triathlon, that's no easy feat. What made you decide, hey, I'm going to do this?
It was the desire to feel success, to do something that no one in my family had done. Because I still remember this woman came up to me at one point and she was like, well, your brother's had huge success. What have you done in your life? And it still sticks with me. I was like, I can't compete with that. I just wanted to figure out who I was for identity. In 2009, I went and I lived in an ashram, which was really privileged. I was so honored to do that, and studied yoga for 6 weeks because that had been important to me. I'd been doing yoga for 10 years up to that point. And so I wanted to kind of develop that knowledge a little bit more. And so that was a really impactful experience. And I came out of the yoga ashram. I had been started swimming masters to stay in shape. So it had been 10 years since I'd gotten back in the pool. And a woman came up to me that was her master's. She's like, we're putting together an Ironman team for Lake Placid in July of 2010. I think you'd be great. Do you want to do it? I'm like, yeah, that sounds fun. That's what I said. So I started swimming. Swimming was fine. Swimming came back really quick. I could do 4 miles in less than 90 minutes. Then I was like, oh, but I don't have a bike. I was like, but I've never clipped into a bike. The last bike I rode was when I was like 7 years old, and it was a Huffy. I have no idea what I'm doing. So a friend of mine said, I have this old bike. Train on this if you want. See how you like it. It's yours if you want it. So it fit me fine. And I was like, but I've never run more than 10 miles. I've never done, other than swimming, a bike or a run at that distance ever in my life. And the race was 8 months away. I'm going to blame youth and stupidity, because I was like, this sounds great. I'm going to do this. And so I signed up for it and I trained. I think if you're an athlete, it comes back really quick. Your muscles are just used to that training. And so my body was used to the training. I understood what it meant to train for hours. And so that came back pretty quickly. But I would fall every time. Every single time I got on a bike, I would fall because I couldn't unclip my foot fast enough. So my feet would stay in the pedals and I would just fall over. So embarrassing. But it was like a swimmer out of water. I mean, literally. When I did the Ironman, people would say, you're so lucky because you have the swimming part down. Like that comes so easy, because that's the part that most people struggle with. I was third out of the water for women. The other two were professional athletes. So I have 138 miles still to do with my legs, because as a swimmer, I don't have the leg strength of someone that played soccer or someone that played ice hockey. For me, that was the hardest part in the training. And got out of the water. Awesome. I felt great. I got on the bike. I rode. I was really nervous about that. The Adirondack Mountains, up and down and up and down. I was so worried I'd fall. I didn't fall. I got off the bike, felt really good. I'd never run a marathon before. I'm like, I ran 6 miles. I'm like, this is amazing. I feel good. I might run this whole marathon. And then at mile 7, I'm like, I definitely don't feel so good. And then at mile 8, I'm like, nope, don't feel great at all. And I just got into this deep, dark place of, the only way I can describe it is I wanted to peel off my skin. Like everything in my body was telling me to stop. My brain was telling me to stop. Being an athlete, being pushed past the limits of comfort, I knew how to keep going and like just put one foot in front of the other. And also that time I'd been sober for 3 years. And I also knew that that was the darkest I'd ever been. And I could keep pushing through a marathon if I had to. I just had to put one foot in front of the other. For 10 miles, I walked. And someone told me, anytime you feel down or anytime you're struggling in the Ironman, just smile, because that'll start to change everything around. And I remember having this conversation with myself. I'm like, just smile. I'm like, I don't want to smile. Smile. I don't want to smile. Smile. It takes you to this really, really dark place. And it's like, when you finish this race, you never have to run another lap or step in your life, but you have to finish. You have to finish. And so I think that's where that competitive drive was really helpful at that time. I just kept going.
It's amazing how the mental aspect and the mental mindset can make one do things that physically you would think one couldn't do.
100%. Mental is 98% of the game. I mean, I could not have completed the Ironman if I hadn't put in the physical training at all. But when it comes down to it, the mental component was the most important thing, right? Mind over matter. If I didn't think I could finish or told myself to give up, I would have done it in a second, even if I still had enough to push through and finish. I'm a huge believer that all of your cells are listening to your thoughts. So whatever it is we think is what our body does. And so if we believe we're capable of doing great things, then we're going to do great things, whatever those great things are. But if we limit ourselves through the power of our mind, there's no way we'll ever achieve it.
Taking a step back and going back to high school for a minute, you had mentioned that you kind of started dabbling with substance abuse. How did that affect your swimming?
It had a huge impact on my swimming. It had a huge impact on my grades. I started showing up to practice under the influence and just not caring. Looking back, I think I probably had a little bit of depression, but mental health and mental wellness wasn't as talked about and open as it is now. As a female athlete, I just tried to push through. I was like, it'll get better. It'll go away. And I didn't know how to make it go away. And so when I discovered substances, they made that doubt and that voice kind of quiet down. And so I'm like, okay, I like this. I like the way it's making me not think about how I'm feeling.
With the way it was making you feel, did you ever think about quitting swimming?
Yes, with substance use becoming more regular and I started hanging out with different people. I spent a lot of time with the people I wanted to know in 7th and 8th grade. So the lacrosse players and the soccer players in Baltimore, it was like the party crowd. It was the cool kids. And so I went to my mom and it's a junior and I said, I don't want to swim anymore. It's lame. My friends play soccer and lacrosse. Can I just quit? I'm going to quit swimming and I'm going to play lacrosse. And my mom said, okay, so you're going to quit. I said, yep, I'm going to quit and I'm going to play lacrosse. I'm going to go out for women's lacrosse. And she said, you've never picked up a lacrosse stick in your life, but you're going to go play. And I was like, yeah, I'm a good athlete. I can do this. And she said, Hilary, these girls have been playing lacrosse as long as you've been swimming. What makes you think it's going to be so easy? I'm like, I got this. Meanwhile, my grades had started slipping because of substance use. I was a straight A student through 7th grade, and I'm not coordinated on the land. I can't kick a soccer ball. I can't play tennis. I'm a swimmer. She said, well, these are your options. You can quit swimming and you can go out for lacrosse, but know this. Right now, you're being contacted by colleges. So just know if you play lacrosse and you quit swimming, you're responsible for every cent of your college education. We don't have the money. My mom is a teacher. My dad was a state trooper. She said, so if you can play lacrosse, you don't get a scholarship, you're responsible for every cent, your loans, all of it. Or you can keep swimming for a few more years. You can have your college education paid for, and you can go anywhere. If you don't swim, it's going to limit your chances, your choice. I knew that was a big deal. I knew paying for college and loans, like I knew that much. And I was like, okay, fine. So I kept swimming and I'm glad I did. My mom and dad probably would have guided me back to swimming if I had honestly said lacrosse, but that felt really empowering. It's like I got to make that choice and say, what's the most important thing? Like, okay, I'm going to stick with it. And I stuck with it for 6 more years, but I'm glad I did.
What was the recruiting process like for you?
I ended up going to the University of Richmond for 4 years. And when I saw the campus, I know this is it. I love this school. It was beautiful. I had a friend that went there. So I ended up going out that night with meeting some other people. And it just felt like the place for me. I just knew. So I didn't have this where I went to see a bunch of schools and met with different teams. I love the intimacy and the beauty of the campus at Richmond.
When you got to Richmond, did that kind of reinvigorate the swimming feel for you just because you're away from home, you got to be on your own? Did it sort of say to you, you know what, I really want to do this again?
It did. Swimming in college reinvigorated my love for swimming. And it was also more of a team mentality and a community that I really liked that I didn't really get at the club level. It was less individual. If you won, you got this many points. If you got second, you got this many points. Swimming at clubs, a lot of the time, unless you're in a relay, it's really just individual. It's an individual sport. So I liked that team mentality. I liked the connection. I liked that community that the swimming team brought that was different at a club level. And so my freshman year, I did great. I broke 4 records. I had the 1650, I had the 1000, I had the 200 fly. I think we had the 4x200 freestyle relay as well. And that was really good. And I felt like I was part of a team and I loved that. And I'm still friends with a lot of the people from the swim team at Richmond and we still keep in touch.
While being in college and getting your love of swimming reinvigorated, college can also be a place for, shall we say, experimentation. With what you had talked about with having some substance issues, how did college affect that for better or worse?
My freshman year, I had fun, but I was really focused on swimming because I found that love again. And so My sophomore year is when it took off more. I mean, I definitely partied my freshman year. I drank a lot, had a lot of fun, but my sophomore year is when it took over a little bit more of my time and swimming started to fade away again. I definitely dove deeper into my disorder, my disease during college. It's a great place for someone living with substance use disorder can exist because you can hide really easily. So my grades started slipping my sophomore year, and so they put me in study hall. So there were better tools than in high school, and I graduated in 4 years, and I don't know how, and I still made it to classes in the morning, and I still made it to practice even if I'd gone out the night before. But I could always find someone to drink with. There's always somebody that doesn't have a test the next day or doesn't have class on Tuesday or whatever it is. And so it made it really easy to dive deeper into that experimentation. On the swim team too, a lot of other people drank. I mean, it was a really big party, which wasn't true in club swimming, but at my college, it was a really huge, it took off pretty quickly. And I started blacking out in college, which means that every time I would drink, I put substance in my body, I would remember what happened. So the next day I'd wake up and I'd be like, I have no idea what happened last night. And at first it was funny, but it really stopped being funny senior year. And then as I graduated, when that continued, that blackout drinking. But I'd say in college is where the drinking and substance use really took over and went way beyond the swimming.
Did that create an issue with the coaching staff? Because I imagine at some point, unfortunately, somebody, whether it's a coach or an assistant, would have noticed.
It did. You know, with substance use disorder, hiding it is a really big thing. And so I hid it as much as I could. And I remember a coach one time saying something to us, whole team came in, everybody was hungover. He sat us all down. He's like, this is a disgrace. Like, why are you doing this? At the time, nobody took him seriously. People were just kind of like, whatever. I mean, we had this sense of entitlement. And I think we all felt like, whatever, we're just college kids having fun. So we don't really care what you have to say, which is a really crappy mentality and a really poor way of thinking. And then my senior year, my punishment was, I think, my coach told me otherwise, but there were only 4 seniors on our team across diving and swimming. Every year we had 4 captains. And that year he only gave 3 people a captain role. And I was the one that was left off. That's something that's really stuck with me as kind of a consequence of my entitlement and my actions with alcohol.
At the time, mentally not being named captain, how did that affect you?
I checked out. I'm getting a little emotional thinking about it. It might not seem like a big deal to some people. They might be like, so what? You weren't named captain. Why is that a big deal? It hurt a lot. My eyes still well up thinking about it. Clearly I need to let it go and work through it. But it was something that I always wanted to be like that leader in a team. And it just made me feel like I wasn't good enough. If you talk to anyone that's struggling with substance use disorder, that's something that's really pervasive is that they feel not good enough. And that's why they start drinking and using drugs in order to escape and check out. And so what that did for me, it kind of reiterated that fact that even your coach doesn't think you're good enough.
You don't get this mental check of approval from your coach. Your senior year, you're getting ready to graduate. Where at that point are you thinking, where am I going with my swimming career? Where am I going with life?
Yeah, I knew as soon as I was done swimming, I was done. Actually, I forgot about this. So my last college conference championship was in the mile, and Michael came on deck to count for me. He was 14. It was in DC. I think it was at George Mason. It was right before the Olympics. It was the summer because he turned 15 in June 2000. And he came down. We put him in a Richmond t-shirt. And we were like, oh, he's our manager. So he counted. In college swimming, we used to put the counters in the water. And so the mile, it's 66 laps. They have someone that puts a counter in for you, so you know how many laps you have left. And so once you see this big orange block, you know that that's your last lap. Michael came down and counted for me for my last race ever. And when that last race was done, I was like, I'm done. I'm so done. And as far as life, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had no clue. I majored in sociology and criminal justice. I wanted to do psychology. That was what I really wanted to study in college. I was so fascinated by how the brain works and how it controls our body and how we think and motivations and trauma. I was really fascinated by that. And my student advisor, I went in, this is what I want to study. And she said, you're not smart enough to do that. You should go the sociology route instead. And I never told my parents, so probably 5 years ago. They were so upset. They're like, why didn't you tell us? I'm like, I don't know. I just believed her. So at that point, I didn't know because I was sociology and criminal justice. I thought maybe I wanted to do criminal profiling in the FBI. I was like, okay, it kind of is how the brain works and why, people do the things that they do. And then someone told me, I'd smoked marijuana and they're like, you can't smoke marijuana and go in the FBI. I was like, oh man, really? So, and you can't hold a gun. I was terrified of guns. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess I can't do that. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I graduated. And I was glad I was done with swimming.
Yeah, I was a swimmer growing up too, by no means at the level that you were at. I was a butterflyer, and to this day, like when somebody says you want to go swimming, it's like, yeah, you know what, I'd like to get in, but as soon as I get in, I get all these things of, great, now I got to go swim laps, now I got to do drills, and you don't have to, you're just sitting in the pool, but all these things come back, and I'm like, maybe I'll just get out.
I took my son the other day. And it's so funny because I had the opposite effect. So he sat there and he's like, what are those flags for? Why is the lane this way? And there's something inside that started to get really excited to share this with him. I need to start swimming again. And it was the first time in 23 years that I felt the desire to get back in the pool. Do you want to hear a funny story?
Yes, please.
My son is taking swimming at Big Blue. And we were there the other day and he had a substitute. The guy that was checking him in said, oh my gosh, don't worry. Your teacher is almost a professional swimmer. And I go, really? Who's teaching a swimming lesson? Like, oh my gosh, this is exciting. Did Tom Dolan come back? Like, is someone in the pool teaching tonight? And he's like, oh, it's Mr. And I forget what his name is. He swam in high school and almost made it to his college swim team. And I was like biting my tongue because I'm like, that is not professional. And he has no idea. Nobody at the swim club knows that my son's uncle is the greatest swimmer of all time, but it was just really funny. And then he comes over and he's like, okay, so this is what we're teaching Alexander today. And he's, when you swim the freestyle stroke, and he's explaining the techniques of freestyle, and he's like, you get your elbow high, and then this is how you want to put your arm in the water. And we breathe to the side, not in the front. And I'm looking at him and again, trying to bite my lip. And he was being so sweet and so nice. I know how to swim. I know how to swim.
Is this kind of a bonding moment for you with your son? In a way, it's kind of helping you rediscover your love for it as well.
I love that. He's such a water baby. He loves it. He loves to go in. He loves to do somersaults in the water. He loves to jump in. The only thing that's hard is letting him experience it as he's experiencing it and not try to coach him or teach him. Every once in a while, I'm like, do you want to work on your backstroke? He's like, no. I'm like, okay, because I don't want him to feel pressured into swimming. And I said to him, the only thing you have to do is be water safe. The same thing my parents said about us. You have to know how to jump in, swim to the side safely, and be comfortable in the water. That's all I want. Anything else is up to you. But he has helped me kind of reignite that enjoyment in swimming and that love for the water and everything that it gave me and it gave our family. He watched for the first time 2 nights ago because Uncle Michael swam, because he's never seen Michael swim. He doesn't really understand. He's like, how do people know who he is? Because someone in his school asked him about it. And I said, because he's the greatest swimmer of all time in the history of the world. And he was like, who was better before him? I'm like, nobody. And he goes, what about Jesus? I'm like, well, Jesus walked on water. He didn't swim in it. He's just so blown away. And so we watched the 100 butterfly from 2008. And Alexander was kind of like, I don't understand. This was one of the greatest races of all time. This is by 1/100th. And you can't even blink that fast. And Alexander's like, I still don't understand.
Being a working mom, how are you able to balance being a parent and then also doing what you need to do professionally?
Sports and athletics has helped in that because you just do what you have to do and get done what you have to get done. I'm an entrepreneur. I work from home. I work for myself. So if I don't do it, nobody else is going to do it, which on one hand is really great, that self-reliance. But on the other hand, I need to be better about, which recovery has taught me, is just letting other people help. And so I'm still trying to find that balance of doing what I need to do and telling other people, hey, I really need help here. And so for me, the things that keep me the most grounded and supported are the movement, moving my body. And mindfulness and meditation are something that's come in the last couple of years that have changed the game for me, because taking that 20 minutes 2 times a day allows me more time throughout the day because it quiets that noisy mind of mine that says, like, I have to do this. I have to do this. Okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? I think I'm slowly starting to navigate the tools.
We've talked a little bit about the substance abuse, and you've mentioned a little bit about the recovery. How did you decide to go say, I want to get better, I don't want to do this anymore?
I was a wine drinker and I was a blackout drinker. And so for a really long time, I didn't think that I had a problem, because I think of alcoholics or people that are struggling with substance use disorder are men living under a bridge drinking out of a brown paper bag, because that's all I knew. I didn't know anybody in recovery. I didn't know anybody that had gotten sober. I didn't know anybody that had publicly had a drinking problem. I was starting to make really bad decisions. I was winding up in places I didn't know how I got there, things that started to feel really scary living in Washington, D.C. as a 28-year-old woman. So I was in a relationship and the person said, if you don't get help for this, because I tried a couple of times to go in and out of 12-step rooms and meetings and I just wasn't ready. So he said, if you don't seek treatment, I'm going to tell your family how bad it was. And something felt really shameful about my family knowing that I was drinking in secret and that I was blacking out, even though they knew it'd become an issue. And they'd said things before like, you're embarrassing me, or you drank so much last night, I'm not comfortable with that. Or did you get home okay? Because you called me and you were out. So I just started to hide it. And so when he said that to me, I was like, well, I don't want them to know how bad it was. And so I just felt like I needed to check a box and say, fine, I'll go to outpatient treatment just to kind of get you off my back. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Then I'll figure something else out. But it did work. And it was exactly what I needed for a little bit of accountability and a little bit of knowledge. I wanted to be in a room of other people who were like me that said, I'm struggling with something similar and our feelings are the same, because I'm a feeler. And so I'm driven by how I feel. And so if I'm in a room of people that have the same feelings as me and I can connect with them and say, okay, you look different than me and you sound different than me, but our stories are very similar. And what you're saying sounds like something I've experienced. Okay, then I believe you and I trust you. And so I started to let people into my world and my heart and my space that way. And that's when I started healing and I started understanding that this was not a disease of lack of willpower. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't something I chose. It wasn't because I was a bad person, but it was actually a disease that I was born with that was flipped on when I put alcohol in my body. That made me feel okay. And that made me feel like I was less alone. And it also made me feel like there was a solution and I had a little bit of hope. And so in 2007, I walked into a treatment center and started healing from that day and started learning other rituals and habits and tools that I could use to manage my substance use disorder on a daily basis. Because that's what it is too. It's a disease. It doesn't go away. It'll never go away. And so what I have to do is every day make better decisions that help me move further away from substances, not closer to it.
When something negative happens in your life, whatever it is, you don't get a speaking gig, somebody close to you gets very ill or passes away, what do you do so you don't fall into falling back into substance and alcohol abuse?
2022 was a year that just rocked me. I finalized painful divorce and I moved. And then at the end of last year, my dad died unexpectedly. He just didn't wake up one morning. And so at the end of last year, when that happened, was the closest in 15 years I've ever come to picking up a drink, because I felt so broken and so sad and so lost. Thank goodness I had 15 years to that point. I knew logically that putting a substance in my body, that drinking was not going to bring my dad back and it was not going to make me feel better. And the next day I was going to wake up and have to deal with that. In my mind, I knew that's what was going to happen. In my heart, I was just in so much pain and I wanted the pain to go away. And so what I did instead is I went to Ashley Addiction Treatment with my friend Charlie Engel. We're ambassadors for the center. He was coming in that weekend after my dad's funeral and he's like, hey, why don't you come with me and share your story? Charlie picked me up and we rode to Ashley together and I shared my story of recovery in a room full of 100 other people who had less than 30 days of sobriety. And let me tell you, those 30, 60, and 90 days are so hard. I shared my story and I cried and I was like, I just buried my dad. And you know what I wanted to do? I wanted to go to a bar and I wanted to check out and I wanted to numb, but I'm here because I'm sharing my story of hope, because to keep it, you have to give it away. It's like kindness and love are infinite and it's abundant. If I can share my story of hope with you and you get something out of it and it helps you, hopefully you'll go out and help somebody else. And that's kind of how it works. And it helps, because I had other people come up and say, your story was so powerful. I wanted to leave tomorrow. I wanted to check out a treatment. I'm so tired of being here. I've been here for 7 days. That gives me hope that I can get through tomorrow. If you lost your dad unexpectedly, I can stay for one more day. And that was incredible. So just sharing that message and knowing that somebody else heard something in there that helped them stay sober one more day is exactly the reason why I started sharing about my recovering out loud and sharing my journey a year ago.
You mentioned Ashley Addiction Treatment, and they're hosting a charity event called the Penguin Movement for Recovery. Could you kind of tell people a little bit more about that?
Yes, it's so fun. So in July 22nd and 23rd, so Charlie, who I just mentioned, is celebrating 31 years of sobriety. And so Charlie is an inhuman human. He's amazing. He ran the Sahara Desert. His story of recovery is so powerful, totally different from mine. It's so great working with him. And so every year on his anniversary, he moved as many hours consecutively for every year he's been sober. This year it's 31 hours. So he is going to move his body for 31 hours consecutively on the campus of Ashley Addiction Treatment. However, not everybody else has to do that. There is a really fun overnight component where you can sign up. It's mostly ultra runners, ultra marathoners, people who've climbed Everest, those adventure seekers. And so you can ride a bike, you can walk, you can run, and it's really fun. We did it last year for the first time. Charlie moves for 31 hours to raise awareness around substance use disorder and its recovery. But this year, we're going to do a really fun 5K also and do family fun day and activities for kids on that Saturday. And so all of the money raised goes towards providing scholarships for people who can't otherwise afford treatment. So those who really need it that maybe don't have insurance or just can't cover the cost, we provide that cost. We cover the cost for them based on the money that we raise. We provide them with a scholarship so they can seek treatment, so they can help their families, so they can be better members of community. It's such a powerful event.
For anyone that wants to find out more, perhaps if you have the ability to give a few dollars, go check out ashleytreatment.org for more information. Once again, ashleytreatment.org. It's on July 22nd and 23rd. When you do a lot of your motivational speaking and people come up to you, such as when you went to Ashley, and tell them how you made them feel, how does that make you feel in terms of your journey towards staying sober and trying to pay it forward?
It makes me feel like I did the right thing by sharing my message out loud. Because for 15 years, I kept it quiet, didn't talk about it because I still felt like there was shame and stigma around substance use disorder, and especially in women in recovery. And so I kept really quiet because I was worried about what other people would think of me. But what I've realized is people dying from overdoses and substance use disorder, the number has surpassed anything we've seen before. It's higher than the AIDS epidemic. 100,000 people are dying every year from substance use disorder and overdoses, and it keeps going up. What I realized was that I didn't have the luxury of staying silent if I could help one person get sober, because then that one person can help two people, and those two people can help 8 people. When someone comes up to me and says, "Thank you so much, your message resonates," or "Thank you so much, I got sober, I have a 30-day chip now because I heard your story on a podcast, or I watched you on TV, or because I heard you talk at this event," that makes me feel more grounded in my decision and hopeful that this message will continue to spread and gain traction and help more people. Because the more people we help, the more people they help, the better everybody is. I wanted to decrease the stigma around the disease. And if we can pick up an army of people who are willing to say, like, "I'm struggling too, thank you for helping me feel less alone," then that makes me really happy.
For yourself, in order for you to stay sober, do you still go to AA meetings and things like that?
I go to 12-step meetings, not as regularly. My first year, I went every single day, sometimes twice a day. Now I have kind of rituals and routines that I do that are non-negotiable for me, and I can start to feel it now. It's a brain disease. And so when I start to feel anxious or off kilter or obsessing about a drink or maybe obsessing about something else, I know that I need to start implementing more of my rituals and start upping the number of yoga practices. Yoga is not what got me sober. A treatment center and recovery and meetings, that is what got me sober, and that's always keep me sober 100%. But these other things help me feel balanced and centered and grounded, like yoga and meditation and moving my body. So those are the things that I turn to now, like, instead of being so self-reliant. But what I've realized is that when it comes to my health and wellness, like, I have to incorporate community. So I have a really strong group of women. I have a really strong group of people in recovery that I turn to. And then I know that no matter what I say or what I'm feeling, I'm not going to be judged. I can say something, I'm like, "I know that sounds really crazy and I know it doesn't make sense, but I'm just going to say this here." And they're like, "It's all good. We love you." Maybe they'll offer advice. Maybe they'll just listen, whatever it is I need. those are things that I do on a daily basis to maintain my spiritual condition in order to not pick up a substance.
When it comes to seeking help, what advice would you give for anyone who's listening who might be having an issue with any sort of substance that they should do first?
If you think that you're having a problem, if you think it could be a problem, it probably is. I questioned my drinking, that I thought maybe it was a problem long before I ever admitted that I had one. My suggestion is see if you can go 30 days. How do you feel? Are you thinking about a drink at the end of every day? Are you counting the days on your calendar until you can have one? Are you feeling anxious and unsettled? These are things that I would look to and say, okay, if that's the case, then maybe you should look into a treatment or contacting a support group or reaching out to someone you know that is sober or in recovery. I'd had a handful of friends that say, I think I might have a problem. What should I do? And that's the advice I give them. I say, or do you want to go to a meeting? Like, I'll go to a meeting with you. Here's some literature that you can read. What are your thoughts on that? Because at the end of the day, people said this to me all the time, and I wasn't ready until I was ready. And so there's nothing that we can do to encourage someone to go, but just give them information. Because someone in active addiction or someone with a problem is always going to choose their substance over anything else. And the more deeper into their addiction they go, the worse it gets. There's a ton of resources online. They can reach out to me. I'm happy to point them in a direction. There's medically assisted detox. There are inpatient treatment. There's outpatient treatment. There are meetings. There are communities online. Today, it's so beautiful that there are so many options for people to seek help based on their schedule, their lifestyle, where they live, what their job title is. I love that there are so many options that remove barriers for people who are looking for resources. And I'm happy to help anybody. My DMs are open on Instagram, my emails on my website. I am happy to help or facilitate any kind of connections or point people in the right direction that think that they might be struggling.
With substance abuse, what's the biggest stigma associated with it that you would like to change?
I would like to change the stigma that's a choice. Because at no point in my life, at 4 years old, at 14, at 24, I never said I want to be an alcoholic when I grow up. Nobody wants to choose that life. Nobody chooses. It is not a willingness thing. A friend of mine talks about this dopamine receptor. So an addict, just take me for example, when I drink a glass of wine, my dopamine bumps up 10 to 100 times more than somebody who has a glass of wine that doesn't have a problem. My body and my brain says, I want more of that. And eventually I want more of that to the point where I will disregard everything else, including showers, friends, eating, anything that sustains life. And that's when you're deep in severe substance use disorder. My best friend at her 30th birthday said, I just drank half a glass of champagne. I think I'm fine to drive home. Because I told her I'd drive. I was sober at that point. And I was like, how do you just have half a glass? She's like, I just didn't want any more. And as someone that's in active addiction or someone that's born with a brain disease of substance use disorder, that's not possible. They'll either drink until they're sick or blacked out, and it's not a choice. And so my biggest hope in decreasing the stigma is that people see it, the diagnosable disease. It's like cancer. It is like diabetes. It is like anything else. We are born with it. It is genetic. There's evidence. There's medical research and data out there. It's just not being talked about. If I can give a voice and I can say, this is a disease, it's not a decision, I will continue to shout it from the rooftop and tell more people and speak openly and vulnerably and vocally until we can do whatever needs to be done to change the mindset that it's a decision.
Playing devil's advocate here, because I love playing devil's advocate. You mentioned cancer. Cancer is really not a choice, but it could be stated that picking up a drink or picking up a drug and deciding to use is a choice. What do you say to people who believe that?
I'd respectfully tell them they're wrong because it's not a choice. There would be days that I'd wake up in such pain and I would sit in the shower and my kidneys would hurt so bad that they were stabbing and I wanted to peel my skin off. I was in so much physical discomfort. By the time the alcohol wore off a little bit by noon, I'd forgotten that pain. And I'm like, I'm good. I can drink again tonight. And there was one time that I tried to control drinking. I'm like, I'm just going to have one glass of wine tonight, just one. And I had one glass of wine. The rest was sitting in the kitchen. And I got into bed and I laid there. And anybody that's ever experienced anxiety knows the feeling of laying in bed with your skin on fire. It is obsessive thinking. All I can do. That's all I can do. I can't sleep. I'm so anxious. I got up and drank a bottle of NyQuil to help me fall asleep. because I told myself I wasn't going to drink wine. So NyQuil doesn't count. And I was able to fall asleep. So with the disease of substance use disorder and of addiction, it's abstinence is the only way to manage the disease. There is no such thing as controlled drinking. So it's all or nothing. Once you know and accept it, then you can start making better decisions and not touch it to begin with. But as somebody that's in active addiction and somebody that struggles with substance use disorder, once you put something in your body, there's no stopping. You can't stop. It is a physical and emotional and mental craving that doesn't stop until it's fulfilled. It's really hard to explain to someone that doesn't understand that drive to seek out things that cause huge consequences and distress in your life. And that's why they say it's a brain disease.
Have you enjoyed learning about how the mind works? Has it made you understand why you used to make the decisions you made?
I love that you just brought that full circle. It's like wanting to know how the brain works in college. I'm still learning because the brain is so complex and interesting. And then you put trauma on top of that, right? Like trauma from the experiences and consequences that I had during active addiction. It's fascinating. Also, what that does is it also allows me to forgive myself for decisions and choices I made when I was in active addiction. If you talk to anybody that's struggling, there's a lot of shame because what they're doing isn't matching up with who they are. So at my core level, at my soul, I remember the person that got me sober said to me at one point, I stay with you because every once in a while I get a glimmer of who you really are. And then you start putting alcohol in your body and you become somebody completely different. What I realized was that little glimmer is who I really am. But the shame that came along, because I didn't want to drink. I wanted to quit. I wanted to stop, but I couldn't stop. But with anything, it's a compulsion too. It's a compulsion. It's hiding it. And then with that comes that shame. And so what I've realized is that acknowledging the medical research that has said addiction and substance use disorder is a brain disease makes me feel okay, that I'm not a failure. It's not willpower. And I can forgive myself for things that went against who I am as a person. Just from that, you start to heal. Once you realize that it's a disease and not a decision, but a lot of people carry that shame with them if they're not accepting that it's a disease, if they think that it's a willingness thing. And that's the stigma, that people think it is a choice. And if the stigma's out there that this is still a choice, then that means that the things I'm doing when I'm drinking or putting substances in my body is also a choice. I don't feel good about those choices. So I must be a bad person. Therefore, this is shameful. And it goes down this path of fear and self-loathing. And that's really dangerous. Look, at the end of the day, we're all worthy of redemption and change and self-love and all of the things that we deprive ourselves of if it is continually said that this is a shameful decision. It's really hard for people to ask for help and seek the treatment they need.
Any point during your abuse, whether it was at the start, near the end, at the height, did you ever think about ending your life?
It was after I quit, and it was after I'd been in treatment. It was after I'd been sober for a while. It was within the first 30 days. When you drink, you stuff all these emotions down. People drink or use substances for a variety of reasons, but sometimes it's just to not feel the way they feel. For 15 years, I poured alcohol in my body to ignore the feelings I was feeling of self-loathing, not worthy, sadness, anger, happiness, joy, discomfort, all of those things. And so what happens is when you stop pouring alcohol in your body to ignore those things, eventually they all come up. Within the first 30 days, I had a pretty upsetting conversation with someone. And I remember getting really angry and being like, I don't want to be here. This isn't worth it. I can't go back to drinking. I have enough knowledge in a couple of weeks of time in my body and in my mind of knowing that this is a disease. I really want to go back, only because I want to escape this pain. And so then that's when I was like, well, I didn't have any Listerine because I knew some people drink Listerine to relapse. I didn't have any vanilla with alcohol in it because that's what people drink to relapse also. I didn't have NyQuil. I didn't have Tylenol. I cleared everything out of my apartment when I got sober so I wouldn't be tempted. And so that's when I realized I don't want to die. I just don't want to feel this pain. And then at about 18 months, I stopped doing the work I needed to in order to maintain my spiritual process. And I was like, is this it? This is all life is? This is not worth it. This is not worth it. This is a waste. I can't turn to my best friend, which is alcohol anymore. So I don't know what else to do. The only option seems like just checking out entirely. That changed pretty quickly to, okay, it's just pain. It's one of those God moments, universe moments of, it's not that you want to end it. You just want to alleviate the physical and emotional pain. because emotional pain can feel worse than physical pain sometimes for me.
With the emotional pain that can affect anybody, how important do you feel it is to talk to anyone, whether it's somebody you know, whether it's a counselor, whomever it may be?
I feel like it's one of the most important things you can do. Without my community or connection to other people, I can suffer in silence. I can talk myself in or out of anything. So left to my own devices inside of the space between my ears, I can say, that sounds like a really good idea. My friend Caroline came over one night. I was spinning midnight. She's like, I'm coming over. She picked me up. We drove around and looked at the monuments at night. And I just got away. I just got out of my head. So for me, and I think for a large majority of people, getting out of our head is really important. Community and having other people to turn to is huge. And so I think having people around you that you really trust, that you can go to in any situation, same reason I turned to alcohol and drugs, going to those people in any situation, good times, sad times, challenging times, all of those things. When I'm angry, hey, I just need a second opinion.
We're talking about community, which involves inclusion, but in this country, exclusivity, which is 180 degrees away, is so important that people want this or want that, and it's almost like they want it for themselves. How do we change that mindset to make sure that you get the message out about community being so important?
Community over competition. There's enough for everybody. Love and kindness is abundant. It is never going to run out. It is not like you have a max amount of love that you can give out in one day. I also think vulnerability is the most powerful form of strength that you can show, because you're like, look, I'm not perfect. I need help. That pulls people in because people want real and authentic. And I think there's so many people, especially women, walking through life with this mask on. And I did this. This is why I drank. If I look good on the outside, it doesn't matter how I feel on the inside. And I think that is a huge disservice to people. Being okay with not being okay with not being perfect, because nobody is, and being okay with asking for help, because it's the strongest thing you can do. It makes other people feel good. Think about it. When someone calls me and says, I'm struggling, can you help? I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. So I can be spinning in my head about something that's going on that's really unimportant. But then a friend calls and says, I'm really struggling. I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. And I forget about my problem and I help her with hers. It's a win-win. That's how community is so important. And then you just pay that forward. And if everybody would just extend their hand to somebody else and just say, can I help you? I think it goes a long way.
You just mentioned it. I think paying it forward is so important. It's not about necessarily how it affects you, but it's about how can you do something to make someone else's life better that you may not even know.
It's something as small as a smile. We think it's all about us. Someone at the post office is rude to me. It is not about me. It's probably because something happened that morning and they're having a bad day. So what can I do? I can say like, okay, I hope you have a good day. Or I can go back and fight with them. What's going to get me further? It's like, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? And most times I choose I'd rather be happy, because at the end of the day, it's not always about being right. If we can just be kind, pay it forward, ask if they need help. A friend of mine said, if someone pops into your mind, just send them a text to see how they're doing, because maybe it's something in the universe saying that they just need a little bit of kindness that day. So sometimes I'll send a random text to someone like, hey, just thinking about you. I hope you're doing well. And it might seem like, why would you do that? It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal, but maybe to that person it is. And maybe it's not. They might look at it and roll their eyes, but they might not. That might be the one thing a person needs in that day and in that moment, just to feel seen, loved, heard, supported, important.
Hilary, thank you for joining the I Play Too podcast today and sharing your very powerful story and very powerful message. Hope to catch up with you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a great conversation. I love this podcast. Thank you for having me.